The Holy Gospel according to St. John, the 13th chapter.
Glory to you, Lord.
Now before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The devil had already put it into the heart of Judas, son of Iscariot, Simon Iscariot, to betray him. And during supper, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, got up from the table, took off his outer robe, and tied a towel around himself. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel that was tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered, "You do not know now what I am doing, but later you will understand." Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no share with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." Jesus said to him, "One who has bathed does not need to wash except for the feet, but is entirely clean. And you are clean, though not all of you." For he knew who was to betray him. For this reason he said, "Not all of you are clean." After he had washed their feet, had put on his robe, and had returned to the table, he said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you as an example, that you also should do as I have done to you. Very truly I tell you, servants are not greater than their master, nor are messengers greater than the one who sent them. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them." This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Be seated, please. Last Sunday was my first Sunday back from sabbatical. It was really an exciting day for me to come in, not have to preach. Thank you, Chad. Just kind of relax and get back into the flow and say hi to people. And being I'd started midweek last week, it was just kind of a nice way to segue into ministry again. I have to tell you a funny story, though. Just before the 9:30 service began, a woman ran up to me and she said, "Pastor Mark, can I talk to you just a second?" I said, "Well, of course." And she said, "I have to tell you, I had a dream about you last night." I said, "Really? I hope it wasn't a nightmare." "Oh, no," she said. No. I dreamt that you came back to us today on your motorcycle with black, spiky hair." "Sorry to disappoint you," I said. "I'll give it some consideration." I don't know what the rest of you expected to see, but at least that was one person's fantasy. I don't know. But anyway, the events of the last 12 weeks have literally reshaped my life. And that is not an understatement at all. As you recall, last June I sent out to everyone in the congregation for the second time, in fact, an outline of what I was planning to do and what I was going to write and the times and dates and flow. But it was just an outline. And so I can tell you now that I'm back on this side of it, my plans did in fact go very well for July and for August. September, however, was something I could not have possibly anticipated, because, as you know, it took a dramatic turn early on as I came back and then was with Naomi as she was in the process of dying. And so this morning, I want to share that journey with you, the whole sabbatical of sorts. I'll condense it. I'll try not to make this a boring travelogue. I'll really try. But I have to tell you some exciting high points. The place you see here is Holden Village in the state of Washington. It's in the Cascade Mountains. You get on Lake Chelan and you go up about 26 miles and you take a bus ride for another hour or so, and voila, there you are, where there's no internet, no cell phone service, none of that. It's blissful as long as you're not too attached to that stuff. But it was a wonderful time. The last time I was there was 23 years ago. I was a young man back then, and I remember doing a 8-mile and a 10-mile hike 2 days in a row and feeling great. The day I got there, the next day I went out on an 8-mile hike, expecting to repeat the adventures of my youth. I hiked 4 miles to a lake, and I sat down on a rock, and I thought, I can't get back. I am pooped, and I hurt all over, and all I've got is a sandwich. I'll die out here. So I ate my sandwich. I hiked back and went straight to the dairy bar where I had a big chocolate malt, and I can tell you that I got a lot of reading and writing done because I was so sore I couldn't move after that. So got a lot done. So I read some books, would read in the morning, and in the afternoon I would do some writing. And in fact, during the following 4 days I was there, I was extremely productive. I really felt almost as if the Spirit was leading me in my thoughts, my writing. I got a lot of notes taken, and so that was a terrific time up there. But basically what I was trying to focus on was how God has been at work in my life the last 10 years. Caring for Naomi, caring for you, serving in both places. Once I came out of there, I went into the Puget Sound area, visited some friends in Seattle and up in Anacortes, which is on the north side of Puget Sound up there. And this is a picture from Anacortes, looking out over Puget Sound. And in fact, you could probably see in the distance Port Angeles if it wasn't so cloudy and hazy, but that's where I had my first call as an associate pastor back in '83. And I saw Brett on the weekend, and it was just a wonderful time. Weeks 3 and 4, I came back, and out of those 20 or so pages of notes, I began to look at them and see where things were beginning to take shape and form, possibly as a book. The easy part was the title, but then I began to see that there were 7 themes, which I made into 7 chapters, which I'm going to share with you in a bit. And I was very excited during that time. So the end of the month, then I called Mike Belk over here in the choir, and Mike and I took off on the 1st of August on our motorcycles. We went down to visit his parents in Cadiz, Kentucky. And for the second year in a row, we went to the Coon Dog Cafe, home of the best coconut pie you can get, right, Mike?
That's the best.
Right, look how happy Mike is in that picture. He's just, I have a picture from last year too, and he's bimming just as much as that. So. But then from there and we've got Eddie Chavez. Eddie's back there in the same place. Eddie always sits on that last chair in the back there, yeah. And there's Eddie's daughter, Nan Chavez, and her husband, Jim Farrell, and Mike and I. We went to Hickory Hills Resort, which was maybe an hour's ride away, and got to see where Nan is, and it's just a beautiful setting down there. So thank you, Mike, for making that such a wonderful trip for me personally. Came back to Rockford and worked a bunch more, continued to develop the themes of my writing, and by this time I was just really, really excited about what was taking shape and form in the book. The end of August, I went up to Minnesota, Albert Lea, Minnesota, where my dad lives, for his 90th birthday party. We were up there the 29th, 30th, and 31st of August. That's my dad there, between my 2 sisters, Rita, next to me, and Sue. And if you were here for Naomi's memorial service, you got to see them as well. But pretty proud of my dad and my sisters. Dad's doing great at 90. His secret sauce, 3 eggs every morning with toast, with toast, and walking 4 miles a day. So that's his ticket to being healthy and looking so good at 90. I left on September 1st for Omaha, Nebraska. I stayed with a former St. Mark Associate Pastor, Chris Hawkins, if you remember him. He was here from 2005 to approximately 2009, and he's a pastor there in Omaha. Stayed with him for an evening, and then the next day took off to stay with a friend and a seminary classmate of mine in Boulder, Colorado, and that's in this picture here. The next day, I had a full day before I headed out to the Durango, Colorado area to continue writing, and I just went up to Estes Park. And it's interesting because I found out that others had been up there about the same time. So Steve and Judy Pentecoff, in fact, were in Estes Park the same day I was. At noon, I was walking along the streets looking for a good place to have coffee and sit down and maybe continue some writing, when I got a phone call from Ann and Glenn here in Rockford, and they called to tell me that Naomi had taken a turn for the worse, that she had not eaten, she had not had any liquids for 2 full days, and they were convinced that this really was the turn, this was the end. And I said I would turn around and come right back, of course. After dinner that evening, I went to bed early, thinking I would get some sleep and then just leave first thing in the morning, but I could not sleep. I got up at 3 o'clock, washed my face, got dressed, and was on the road by 3:15. I drove 1,000 miles that day, 15 hours on the road, was back here at 7:30 that night. I didn't know what I would find, and Naomi was in bed with her eyes were open, straining to breathe, and she would be like that for the next 3 days. My son David was in town here. We called Brett from Seattle. He flew out right away that next day. Together we had 3 days together with Naomi, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. She passed away at 2:15 a.m. on Sunday, just as you folks here were ramping up for Rally Day celebrations and a tent service outside. I talked with Pastor Chad about 6:30 in the morning and let him know what had happened, but I asked him not to share news of Naomi's passing during services that day because I wanted you folks to celebrate all the hard work that you had put into that day. News of Naomi could come later. And so that afternoon I sat down and I wrote a letter to you, and Jill Davenport sent that out, and you received that later in the afternoon that day of Naomi's passing. As I think about today's theme of baptism, I am, of course, immersed in the new journey that all of us are promised in baptism. It is a good day to baptize your child, to have baptism at the forefront of what we are doing here. In baptism, as this says, we are raised to new life. And I understood that in the moment that Naomi had passed, she had begun her new journey, her new life in baptism. It had begun. I want to thank all of you who were able to be here to support us on the day of Naomi's memorial, and I know many of you could not be here, and I appreciate your thoughts, your prayers, all the ways in which you have let me know that we have been a part of your lives. I'm struggling to write again, and maybe I hope you can understand how hard that is. I tried last Monday to pick it up and look at it again, and I realized that when I was writing, everything was in the present tense about Naomi, and now everything is in the past tense. There are revisions to be made, more than I can imagine. But I want to share with you today what I have been thinking, what I've been working on, because it is such an important catharsis for me to have this opportunity, this healing opportunity, to write, to thank you, and to invite you into this common journey, which is yours as well with me. The title of the book I'm writing came quickly. I just thought about my life. Tears and triumph. The tears, I think we can understand. The triumph comes because we have been baptized into the life, death, and resurrection of Christ. We are people of hope, Easter people. That is the triumph. And because of our immersion into the waters of baptism, we are continually on that journey toward resurrection. The first chapter, how did I get here? it's just an introduction into me, the author, because other people are going to read this as well, not just you. And so I wanted to say a little bit about who I am. My memories, my fond memories of childhood growing up on the farm with my dad, mom, and two sisters, the things I got to do as a farm boy, how I was involved in my small hometown church growing up, where mom was the organist and dad was on council and head usher and all those other things, and all of us as kids were busy with our music, singing and playing. And again, in a small town, in a small church, in a small school, you get recruited for everything. It's pretty cool. We had a lot of opportunity to do a lot of wonderful things. And in that first part, how did I get here? It also has to do with how did I get here? Why is it that I stand before you every Sunday as a pastor, as a preacher, as one who shares the good news in Jesus Christ? And so I give a little bit of history about my college years, my calling into ministry, seminary, all of that. And then leading up to the year 2007, the second year I was here, where I felt compelled to begin writing a formal work on the theology of resurrection, which we call eschatology. From the Greek word eschaton, meaning last things, so the return of Christ, the resurrection, and again, the claims of baptism. Chapter 2, then, I talk about the immediate, Alzheimer's disease, the deadly intruder. I don't try to cover everything out there about Alzheimer's disease because, again, so many people have written so many wonderful things, and my list, my selected bibliography includes so many good books and things that people have written about this. What I want to point out is something that a lot of people don't know about, and that is Naomi's diagnosis, posterior cortical atrophy, PCA for short. It used to be called Benson syndrome until 1988, when finally this was understood to be something unique to the early onset community. If you think about how rare this is, we know that a large percentage of people, as they age, will get Alzheimer's disease, a frightening amount. There is a segment of population within that called early onset, which are people anywhere from the age of 50 up to 65. That might represent 5% of the Alzheimer's population. Within that 5%, 2% are diagnosed with posterior cortical atrophy, which is the back of the brain which starts to diminish and because of the plaques and tangles begins to shrink and disappear. We saw that on the MRI when Naomi was evaluated. And so that's the area that controls your visual processing. She went blind from that. But another thing I learned about the hard way is that she developed Lewy bodies about 4 years into her diagnosis. And we know that because she began to develop severe hallucinations, terrifying hallucinations, about 4 years in. And in my research for that as well, I discovered that about 25% of that 2% of that 5% develop Lewy bodies and hallucinatory behavior because of the migration of the plaques and tangles from the back of the brain to the primary visual cortex, which then brings on these terrifying hallucinations. Naomi would sit at home and stare at a wall and think she was looking out a window and see that kids were climbing into the house, right through the wall. She saw people trespassing. Sometimes she would look at me and see me. Other times some switch would flip. She would look at me and think I was a stranger and an intruder. She would yell. She would come at me and hit me. She was terrified of me because of her hallucinations. I would bring her to work here at St. Mark because I couldn't leave her alone. I couldn't let her out of my sight, literally. And so at times I would bring her here into the office, and our staff was so gracious to put up with me and my erratic behavior, trying to care for Naomi and get the work done and make sure she was safe. Finally, in March of 2017, I admitted her during day hours to the atrium out by Woodman's, that area out there. And they had her from March until approximately Thanksgiving of that year, 2017. But her hallucinations became so severe that once I left, she would begin to yell and scream at people. And in her mind, she thought she was a teacher again, and everyone there ought to be their students. And they were telling her to get in line, and they weren't doing what she, the teacher, thought they should be doing. She would go, as some people would say, berserk. And that might be an appropriate way to describe her behavior. They would call me and say, "You have to come and get Naomi. She's too disruptive. We can't have her here." This led up then to Thanksgiving of 2017. Once I understood that they had dismissed her and I had nowhere for her to go, 2 years ago this Thanksgiving, I went up to the ER at the UW-Madison Hospital, and I checked her in and I said, "We need help. What do we do from here?" That day she was visited. This is the day after Thanksgiving, on Black Friday. A full complement. Her neurologist, Suzanne Seeger, came to see her, a team of psychiatrists, the medical doctors who were on staff. We had a wonderful team together. They met with Naomi, they met with me, and their conclusion was simple. It is time for her to be in a full-time care facility. You cannot do this any longer, Mark. Somehow I knew that would be the result. And yet, it was so hard to hear. The next Monday, I went to Annam Glen, and I met with the staff there, and they were terrific. They let Naomi stay for a few days to observe her and see if she would fit, and she did. For about a month and a half, from December 1st till mid-January. At that point, the same behaviors began to emerge. She was getting violent, she was yelling, and they said, "We have to take her now to a facility where she can get the help she needs." So she was admitted to the Alexian Behavioral Health Hospital in Hoffman Estates, where they had her for 6.5 weeks. They treated her there. They tried all kinds of different things. Nothing was seemingly effective. She was yelling, screaming, she was biting. This is not the Naomi we know. Finally, they went with what they considered the last resort and went with electroconvulsive therapy, where they put diodes on the brain 3 times a week and administer a mild electrical current to change her brain chemistry to calm her down. When she came back in early March, mid-March, she no longer understood conversation. She did not recognize me. She could not converse. That was really a turning point at which I understood I had lost Naomi at that point, and that she would no longer be able to converse or recognize me, my family, or anyone else who was there. During the early years of her diagnosis, I read everything I could about it. And one of the most helpful resources was the book Still Alice. I know a lot of you have read that. How many of you have read that book, Still Alice? It's a wonderful book. It's fictional, but yet it is written from the author's understanding of how people with this diagnoses function, early onset primarily. I was amazed. I've read the book 4 times because it details almost exactly Naomi's journey down the road of Alzheimer's. And so that, the movie, all kinds of other things that I found were helpful to me. Chapter 3 in the book talks about what my life has felt like the last 10 years. I think back to when I was a farm kid, my dad had me fill buckets, and I carried all kinds of things. And thinking about that, life for me really has been carrying 2 full buckets uphill the last couple of years. Every day, it was Naomi and St. Mark. Naomi and St. Mark. I would let go of one to take the other, but there was no break between the two. There was full-time care for her, full-time care for St. Mark. I don't know how I got through it. I trust that it was the grace of God, your love, your support, your encouragement, and the fact that any of us in this situation don't think twice. We simply do what we have to do. But sometimes we look back and we wonder, how did we get through that? I look back at the last 10 years and I wonder, how did I move through that myself? I simply want to say that I could not have done it without your prayers, your support, your encouragement, and of course, God's grace. In the 4th chapter, I address accepting care from you and from others, and how this was such a crash course in humility for me. It has been my privilege my whole life as a pastor to care for others, to walk with others who have Alzheimer's and their families. It has been my privilege to listen to you, to pray with you, to hold you, to encourage you. But then to be the person on the other side of that was uncomfortable. Especially given the fact that I have been perceived by so many, and even myself at times, to be the strong one. I was the strong sibling. I was the strong child. I was the strong classmate. I have been the strong staff member, the strong pastor. And so to admit that I had reached a point where I needed others desperately was again an important step, I think, in understanding what our relationship as pastor and people really is. You have been gracious to me. You've been kind, generous. You have seen me in like ways, like you. And together we have navigated these years together. I am forever changed and humbled by your compassion, your prayers, where you have been the pastor to me. In chapter 5, I address the issue of tears. And this is the obvious part. Of course, this is a tearful experience to go through for anyone. So many tears seeing Naomi lose her physical and her mental abilities, the way she suffered. Tears when she wasn't looking over her hallucinations and her continual dependency on me to feed her, to clothe her, to dress her, to bathe her. Every conceivable thing in which she was no longer espoused, but an infant. I had become her husband, but also her parent. That was humbling and tearful. The redeeming thing about tears, however, and I thought about this a lot during the sabbatical, tears are redemptive and they are cleansing and they are freeing because they always tell the truth. Tears tell the truth about us. They tell us what we're thinking. They tell us what we're feeling. And we cannot run from our tears. They expose us. They teach us who we are. There were tears, great tears, the day I left her on December 1st, 2017, when I came home and realized she was never coming home again. Tears at an empty house. Empty evenings eating dinner by myself. Wondering what to do until I could fall asleep. So many of you have been through this. You have lost loved ones. You know the loneliness. You've cried the tears. You know that of which I speak. I am still shedding tears over Naomi's death and releasing her to God's care. I was not prepared to speak to you today feeling so emotional. I wrote all this out and I thought I'll be fine. I was fine the day of Naomi's memorial service because I didn't have to say anything up front. But in speaking to you today, the tears are not mine alone. I understand that. These are tears we shed together, and I'm grateful for that. Chapter 6, Why Triumph? This is the best part of what I'm working on. Many of you know that for years and years and years, I have been a student of cosmology, study of the universe, the expansion of it, the fate of the universe. Every time another new article comes out about black holes or dark matter or dark energy or the multiverse, my antenna go out, my ears perk up. Absolutely love the understanding of God's creation and what God is doing with God's creation. I was able to pick up some of what I had started to write 12 years ago when I had to set aside another book I started because of Naomi's approaching illness. But in that opportunity, I'm able to talk about the human dilemma and how that human dilemma, our constant need for conquest, is always an act of failure on our part, and ultimately is only addressed and redeemed by Jesus' death on the cross, by that singular act. It is important to me that we understand what we celebrate on Easter. It is important to me, it is imperative that every time I preach, that you and I understand what it is we celebrate. That our lives are not our own, that we will die, but we will be raised imperishable by the blood of cross on the Christ. Our blood of Christ on the cross, that is our hope, our only hope. So oftentimes when I visit with people, I sense a desire for them to know more. They want to know what that looks like. What can we expect when we die? What is our future? What has God promised to us? And in my book, I want to sort out some of the stuff that's not scriptural, that's out there, versus the stuff that is scriptural, that is confessional, that we talk about every time we recite one of our two creeds, every time we do a baptism, every time we have a funeral, and every time we lift up the name of Jesus Christ, crucified and risen. We need to be clear about what it is we expect of God and of ourselves. And finally, chapter 7. I thought you'd like this title. Practicing What I Preach. Claiming the Promises of Baptism. I've thought a lot about Naomi and what she might be experiencing right now. That she finds herself no longer in a state of suffering or pain or confusion, but at rest in God's loving presence. What will the new heaven and the new earth look like that is promised to us by Paul and the author of Revelation? How do all these extraordinary promises allow you and me to have our lives changed by them? The theological word for that is prolepsis, where the future changes the present. And we see that in Jesus Christ. That when he was raised, he had no longer the same body. He had a spiritual body, a new body, that of the future in the present. A body we likewise look forward to sharing at the resurrection when we too are raised for eternal life. This final chapter on baptism is yoked to our overall theme of the past 5 weeks, living our baptism. And I just want to conclude with my own confession to you. I have come to understand and utterly lay my life upon these promises of baptism. They have presented to me a whole new light of what God is doing in my life and in yours. The promises of baptism have sustained me in the darkest hours of my life. They have proven again that this is all we have to cling to But it is enough. God's promise, God's word of grace in baptism. And so this theme speaks to all of us in our ongoing mission. And that is, as you see in the second line from the bottom, that we are to serve all people following the example of Jesus. Service is what characterizes our lives at St. Mark. And I think this is what we do best as a congregation, living out our baptism, serving one another in love, and sharing in the hope of Jesus Christ. May our words and our deeds continue to reflect this holiest of work. Let us pray. Lord, in the waters of baptism, you have claimed each of us as your children, as inheritors of life. We are grateful, Lord, that we can be in this place today, worshiping you. In fact, celebrating another baptism of one of your precious children. We're grateful, Lord, that we can be a congregation centered around you, centered around love, centered around service to all people. I am grateful, Lord, for every person in this church. And together, Lord, we lift up one another. However they may struggle in their lives, we turn to you to give them what they need. And we ask, Lord, that you empower each of us to have eyes and ears that point outward, that look to one another, always for the sake of Jesus, that like him, we may serve one another with abundant love. We ask it in your name. Amen.